to the debrief, everyone. Day 2 of testimony in the Arizona trial of a man accused of shooting a LivePD officer in the face. Ramon Bueno is the defendant. Trooper James Casey is the victim who survived. Casey expected to testify in this trial. He's been watching from the gallery in the courtroom thus far. Yesterday, we heard a trooper testify about the shooting and about trying to care for his fallen partner on the force. Now, the frantic police radio traffic from that time of terror.
So in DPS, we have codes put up over the air, and 998 is an officer-involved shooting.
What is 999?
Officer down or an officer has been killed.
What is the point of those?
To alert the rest of our units that we've been involved in a shooting or that one of our officers was killed.
Shots fired!
10-9, where the shots fired?
999, 998.
10-4, copy 9-9. What's
We
the,
got officer down, shots fired.
what's the 10-20?
Nice in.
10-4, nice in, shots fired. 998, 999, officer down.
Jesus, go blast again. DPS. Shit.
10-4, he just drove by you again.
That was some of the raw radio traffic in real time. Now the trooper on the stand breaks down what was going through his mind during those conversations.
Shots fired.
Who is that?
So that is me yelling into the radio.
Where the shots fired?
999, 998.
So because I explained earlier, I wore an earpiece on my right ear and the muzzle blast. The gunshot was so loud on my left ear. When I initially yelled out, shots fired, I didn't know if I internalized that or actually said it out loud because I couldn't hear it. So I repeated now by saying proper police code, which is 998, 999.
What are you doing in that moment?
At that point, I believe I'd already retreated back to my vehicle.
10-4, copy 9-9. What's
We
the,
got officer down, shots fired.
what's the 10-20?
What is that?
So at that point, I'm running back up to Trooper Casey. Once again, just repeating myself, saying I have an officer down, roll fire. That means I need fire emergency personnel to respond. And she asked what my 20 was because she's not sure what unit is screaming into the radio. Our 1020 is our location. So she's asking me what location is this shooting occurring.
The trooper continued by walking the jury through what he was seeing and doing in those conversations.
Nice in.
It's a little bit of
10-4,
high,
nice in, shots.
just a stressful yelling at her what my location is. And she's repeating back nights in for all the other units that are listening.
Fire, 998, 999, officer down.
Jesus, go blast again. DPS. Shit.
Who's that?
So I don't know exactly where I was at when I yelled at. It was somewhere after they began shooting at me. It was after I took the kneeling position. So I don't remember if I yelled that out as I was running to the vehicle or as I got to the vehicle. But I wanted to update dispatch because I was fearful that I was about to get shot and possibly killed.
I'm going to talk about that. Had you ever felt that type of fear before?
No, I haven't.
You said you thought you were going to be killed?
Yes.
What about Trooper Alfano?
I'd lost sight of him, but I believed he was in danger as well.
And Trooper Casey?
I was worried that they were going to definitely try to shoot Trooper Casey as he was laying on the ground, defenseless.
Next, that trooper became emotional when he explained the steps he took to try to ensure his fallen partner would live.
326. Advise fire. Officer's been shot in the head.
So they're in direct contact with emergency personnel that's coming to the scene. Even though I knew he wasn't gonna bleed out externally, I was worried that he was gonna bleed out internally. So I wanted her to update fire to let him know he'd been shot in the head, so that for responding emergency personnel, they knew that means he just needs to be transported. They don't need to stop and unload equipment to treat on scene. That, to let them know, basically the backboard and transport, they're gonna strap them down and get them to a level 1 hospital as soon as possible.
26-10-4, copy, Charles 328-1019.
So at this point, Trooper, you took control of the scene, both on the radio airwaves, correct?
Correct.
Saving Trooper Casey's life, correct? And controlling the scene?
Yes, that's correct.
The defense says the officers at the scene were unable to identify the defendant, and the defense pressed that theme decisively on cross-examination.
So you arrive at the Knight's Inn, and I believe you testified that Trooper Casey's takedown lights were on.
Correct.
Could it have been his floodlights?
Yes, it could have.
Okay. And you had your floodlights on too?
Yes.
And I believe you said that those are some bright lights.
Yes.
But you couldn't see inside the car.
That's correct.
I know you put the flashlight against that back passenger window. Did you at any point try and get that back window to go down?
No, I didn't.
No time?
No, sir, that's not why.
Just didn't?
When another officer's conducting a traffic stop and they're having subjects that are uncooperative, you don't want to interrupt that officer to ask him to have them roll down the windows.
In fact, when the Sable came back around and started slowing and you thought it was going to stop, you sensed trouble, correct?
There could be no other conclusion.
Okay. And you didn't see the occupants at that point in time?
I could never see the occupants.
Let's switch now to the second trooper who responded to Trooper Casey's call for backup as he describes what he saw.
I couldn't see in. I was standing off to the C-pillar, so I couldn't even really see into the window that was rolled down. He asked the passenger behind the driver, he wasn't coming up, what's your name? And then he asked him for his social security number. The passenger started to say his social security number. Casey put his head down and started writing in his notebook, and then that's when I heard shots fired.
Did you see anything?
No, I just heard gunshots. I can't specifically remember where I was looking at that point in time, but I know I heard a gunshot. Casey went down on the ground and I just reacted. I pulled my weapon and I started firing rounds at the vehicle.
Where did you start shooting at?
The back window of the vehicle. It happened so fast. I remember the vehicle speeding off. It seemed like instantaneously after the shooting began.
On cross, Bueno's defense asked that trooper if the sounds he heard could have been something other than gunshots.
No, it sounded like a gunshot to me. I know what a gunshot sounds like.
Gotcha. So it was immediately identifiable as a gunshot?
To me, yes.
You had no face-to-face contact with the occupants of the Sable, correct?
Correct.
And I believe you testified, and I may have said this in your statement, when they talked to you October 8th of 2014, that you shot at the back window.
Yes.
And then when it came back around, you're firing at the car.
Yes.
Correct? Could you estimate about how many rounds you fired? Not going to hold you to it.
In total?
Yeah, total.
I think it was 12.
The state's strategy has been to elicit plenty of testimony about the gory scene. Here is testimony from two detectives who were also there.
When I got over to him, I could immediately see that his mouth was filled with blood, and he was, I guess you would say, gargling or choking. So I grabbed him by the vest, kind of leaned him to the side to help get the blood out of his mouth, and told him to spit. He did that, and then I know that he was asking, am I okay? I kind of just talked back to him and said, you're okay. We're here, you're all right, you're doing okay. Have you been hit anywhere else? And again, he would kind of, it was a lot of blood, and I To me, I thought that I saw the round. I don't know if it was the round or not, but maybe it was jawbone, but I could see in there and it would start filling up with blood quickly. So I lifted him back up again and had him spit again.
What else did you do to save his life?
I don't know if I could take credit for saving his life. I think
Try to?
I was trying, I mean, absolutely, I was trying to.
With a few other officers, we started, seeing if he was able to communicate with us. He had made comments like that he had something in his mouth and he was having a hard time breathing, so we were just making sure he was okay and could talk to us and understand us and whatnot.
What did you do?
We made sure that the fire department was notified and was going to be en route. He was laying on his back at the time. We kind of rolled him off to the side to help him be able to get breath in, and his mouth was filling up with blood, and so he could spit out the blood and whatnot.
Attorneys Dina and Anna Yum are with us tonight. So Anna, let's start with the state strategy early off in the case here. This trial started off sounding like an episode of LivePD. There's action, there's viewpoints all over the place, getting every officer who saw something that day, in those overnight hours, to get up there and say, this is what I saw. Is that effective?
I think it is effective because I think they're setting the stage and really creating a story for the jury to see. Because as you know, identification is going to be a key issue in this case. And that's what the state is going to have to overcome in order to get a conviction in this case. So I think they're doing a great job of laying the foundation as to what the scene looked like, what was the story, who were the characters involved, and how emotional it got. I think that these retired troopers, especially I believe retired trooper Cruz, did an excellent and very compelling job in bringing the jury with him in terms of telling his story and what he saw, so the jury was right then and there. And then, of course, I think it was also an excellent strategy describing how grotesque and how horrible this crime was.
Of course, that doesn't answer the ultimate question of identification. We assume that's going to come later on in this case. Dina Dahl here. The defense strategy has been to sort of ninja in and say, I'm going to poke a couple of holes here and there, but not spend too much time doing it and not spending too much time going after witnesses who don't have anything to offer the defense. I think the defense has been on the ball in this case.
I agree. They shouldn't spend too much time with these officers. These officers are excellent and very compelling, and the sooner the defense gets off their story, the better. Their only hope in this case is this mistaken identity, and we'll see whether or not the prosecution's other witnesses of other people in the car is enough for the prosecution.
Certainly, it's ultimately a question for the jury whether there's guilt or innocence here, but the advocacy has been spot on thus far from what I've seen. And still ahead tonight here on The Debrief, you'll hear the evidence attorneys for millionaire heir Robert Durst do not want the jury to hear in his upcoming trial. Plus, closing arguments in the trial of a man accused of asking a friend to kill his doctor wife. Attorneys for millionaire real estate heir Robert Durst want comments Durst made to a prosecutor thrown out of court. At a hearing late yesterday, a California judge said he was likely to rule that Durst's comments fell under an evidence rule which forbids plea negotiations from coming into a trial if a defendant ultimately rejects the plea offer. Prosecutors in California say Durst killed Susan Berman because she knew Durst had killed his own wife years earlier. Here's what the prosecutor says Durst told him.
He says, going forward, I'm told my life expectancy is about 5 years. So there's not much that I could agree with anybody that somebody could offer me unless they could offer me more life. I respond, right. He says something like that, but there's just one much I can say, listen, look at this. I just have no idea how we could reach an agreement on something. I said, well, let me ask you this, and again, I'm going to speak hypothetically so you don't feel like. He says, if there's something that I could do that would be worthwhile for somebody else, and they could do something for me, then there'd be a direction. But I don't see much direction. Your Honor, he brought this up on his own after being told everything that he says can and will be used against him. Bob Durst is basically on his own saying, hey, listen, if I tell you what you want to know, what you want to hear, if I give you that information, what can you do for me? And of course, the argument is, if Mr. Durst didn't have that information to give, he wouldn't be saying this.
Those are the lines Durst's line of defense attorneys want thrown out of court. Here is their side of this argument.
Actually, Mr. Lewin initiated this, and on page 22, at the top of the page, when he starts talking about, to Mr. Durst, what are your hopes? What are your hopes for going forward? What do you hope is going to happen? This is after Mr. Lewin has told him what a great prosecutor he is and how he always wins his cases. And keep in mind that Mr. Durst is in custody on a warrant from California that accuses him of murder. So the reality of the situation is that Mr. Lewin is holding the cards, and Mr. Durst then responds to it by saying, I'm 72 years old, I've only got 5 years to live. You can't do anything for me.
And now let's move to closing arguments in the trial of a Florida man accused of killing his wife and business partner. Mark Sievers is charged with being the ringleader behind the murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers. A colleague found the doctor beaten to death with a hammer in her own home. Husband Mark Sievers is the last man on trial in this case. Co-defendant Curtis Wright pleaded guilty and testified against both Mark Sievers and the third defendant, Jimmy Rogers. A jury convicted Rogers of second-degree murder in a previous trial. The judge began this morning by asking the defendant if he wanted to testify. That request ended with this display of perhaps overconfidence.
Have you had enough time to talk to your lawyer about whether or not you should testify?
Yes.
Do you need any more time? What would you like to do today, sir?
I'm not going to testify,
Okay.
but I'd like to go home.
Okay.
Okay, the defense said Mark Sievers did not conspire to kill his wife and placed the blame squarely on Curtis Wright, who did computer work for the wife's clinic and whose story the defense picked apart.
Why? Why is Teresa Sievers dead? The best answer we can give you is she is dead because Curtis Wayne Wright killed her. The only evidence you have of someone promising payment came from Curtis Wayne Wright. And then when we asked Mr. Wright, his answer was, I don't remember. Mr. Wright is not allowed to forget. Failure of memory is an insufficient reason to allow Mr. Wright to retain his advantageous plea deal. Without Mr. Wright, there is no case. You each have to believe Mr. Wright's story about this conspiracy. You must each believe it, hook, line, and sinker, beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, because he is the only witness who gave any evidence of a conspiracy. Curtis committed a murder with a hammer in a house that was full of knives and guns. And so it's interesting that while Curtis says he got the garage code, the door code from Mr. Sievers, he could have just as easily gotten the code to the safe and used a gun.
During a rebuttal, the state said husband Mark Sievers was the one who put the whole plan into motion and that conversations between he and Curtis Wright proved it.
But for Mark Sievers, Teresa Sievers would not have been found dead on her kitchen floor in a pool of blood. But for Mark Sievers, a brutal homicide would not have occurred. But for Mark Sievers. Mark Sievers is the catalyst. Mark Sievers is the cause. Mark Sievers is responsible for Teresa Sievers' brutal murder, and he should be held so accountable. How much is a human life worth? Most never even.
Objection, Your Honor, improper.
Sustained.
Back to our experts now, Dina, Anna Yum. Anna, I thought that the defense case throughout this trial was sort of here, there, and everywhere, but I think the defense did a solid job of bringing it back into focus on the closings. What was your take?
I thought so too, Aaron. I thought that while I was watching the trial, while it was going on, I was wondering, where's the defense going with this? What are they doing in terms of their cross-examination? But I was pleasantly surprised with their closing argument. I think he did a good job of explaining why Curtis Wainwright is not credible, that this is a circumstantial case, that the prosecution has not met their burden beyond a reasonable doubt if they're hanging their hat on Curtis Wainwright, because he's the glue, he's the key to linking Mark Sievers to the death of Teresa. And I think by him highlighting all the inconsistencies, and not just the inconsistencies, Aaron, but the blatant lies that this man made, I think he made a good point in telling the jury, how can you convict my client based upon this witness who's not credible, who's also a convicted felon?
Yeah, it's clear from the record that the state didn't even trust Curtis Wright at first, and now he's the person the state is hanging everything on. Dina Dahl, what's your take on this? Does the state have enough to convict beyond a reasonable doubt here?
If Mark Sievers was the first of these three co-defendants on trial, then I think we would say he probably wouldn't get convicted. But the fact of the matter is, Rogers has already been convicted by a jury of his peers, and Wright has confessed to the crime. Those crimes wouldn't make sense without their connection to Mark Sievers. The defense didn't really show a reason why Wright and Rogers would kill Mark Sievers' wife. Mark Sievers is the glue that ties it all together, and because of that, I think that even maybe if they didn't tie it perfectly, the prosecution, it might be enough to get a conviction.
Yeah, you know, some of those text messages may be the most critical pieces of evidence in this case. Appreciate the insight, Dina and Anna. Thanks a lot for joining us tonight. And we will be back with you tomorrow at 5 o'clock here on the Law and Crime Network to break down the LivePD trial and let you know what's happening in Sievers, the jury deliberating into the evening as we sign off. We'll see you back here tomorrow on The Debrief.